In this video, entitled cousin demands me to cover up. Is it okay if I fire you? And entitled mom won't watch her kids. They climb into the pasture with my horses. Entitled cousin demands me to cover up. Little things you need to know. I'm a 26-year-old female with a curvy body type, and I have a huge vertical scar from just below my sternum to my navel. I was given the scar because I needed emergency surgery. My life was at risk. There was no other way. Unfortunately, the surgery was botched. I only recently found this out a whole 2 years after it happened. I needed the surgery because I had a perforated stomach ulcer that was at risk of leaking stomach acid into my abdominal cavity. It would have been a smaller scar, but the surgeon accidentally sliced my liver while cutting me open and caused blood to spill out. I lost 3 liters of blood. This meant they had to open me up further than planned. Anyways, long story short, I could have died that night, and my scar is my battle wound. I'm quite proud of it. It shows that I survived, and I think it's sexy. It's also been 2 years since the surgery, and the scar has healed nicely. It's not nasty looking, and it'll fade more in time. Now back to the main story. I went to visit family a couple of days ago since restrictions in my area aren't as bad anymore. It also helps that my family agreed to only invite the vaccinated members. Well, my aunt's house has a pool in the backyard, and I was wearing a bikini. It was tasteful and not overly revealing. You know, not a thong bikini that my aunt decided to wear. But it of course showed my scar, which I didn't think was an issue. Everyone was having a good time when my second cousin, Melanie, came over, pointed her finger at my stomach, and gestured in a vertical sense, clearly referring to my scar. She then made a face and said, "Can you cover up, please? Your scar is triggering me, and it's not okay for children to see because it represents violence." I'm just standing there with my other cousin Shannon, both of us wide-eyed over her phrase. I'm sorry, what violence does my scar represent? I asked her how this was triggering her. Now, I'm autistic and sometimes obvious social cues don't make it to my brain, and my whole family is aware of this. And she full-on says, so your scar is just ruining the atmosphere, and my children won't stop asking me questions about it. Like, not everything has to be about you. I told her that I was sorry. It made her uncomfortable, but that she and her kids didn't have to look at the scar, and that I was not going to cover it up because I wasn't ashamed of my body. She then huffed at me like the big bad wolf who was never invited in the first place. There's a reason why no one invites her, and yells at me in front of the family. I asked you politely to cover up your ugly scar. Don't you understand how rude you're being to me? I told you your scar triggers me, and you should just try for once to not think about yourself. You're obviously trying to be the center of attention at my family's pool party by flaunting your accident at everyone. We all know you only had that surgery to get reactions from people. Then she stormed off like a toddler would. I went back to hanging out with our family, and everyone just laughed her behavior off. She was being a brat, no surprise there. I get it, my scar isn't pleasant to look at, but my aunt was in a string thong bikini showing off her giant C-section scar, and Melanie didn't say anything about that. But because my scar didn't bring life to this world, it's okay to complain about? Okay, Karen. I brushed it off, but every time Melanie had to walk past me, she would say, "Ew, ew, ew, ew," over and over so everyone could hear her tantrum. Finally, I had enough when I heard her loudly explain to her children that their mommy's cousin has Munchausen's that I pulled her aside and flat out ripped into her, in front of everyone and her kids, who were preteen brats, and I said, "You know what, Melanie? Grow up. You're 37 years old, and you being not only a bully but also a complete asshole. You're clearly ruining this get-together for your own personal gain, and I'm sick of your BS. Either grow the fuck up and get over the fact that people have lives that don't involve you, or get out and leave. No one wants you here anyways." She then started to fake cry. It was so obviously fake it hurt, and boo-hooed about how mean I am and how all this could have just been avoided if I hadn't have shown up in the first place. Later on, when she was leaving, her daughter walked up to me and said, "Mommy told me she wished you hadn't survived the surgery because you ruined her life today." Like, wow. Most of my family agree that she crossed the line, but say that I shouldn't have snapped at her so publicly. I do think it might have been tactless to yell at her in front of her kids, but I did suggest for them to run off and get their shoes while I spoke to their mom. They just didn't listen. Is it okay if I fire you? This is a story of MC that a previous boss had done, but involved me directly, as will be explained. Time frame is early 2000s for reference. In my late high school / early college years, I had a job doing telemarketing work during winter and summer breaks. While it was boiler room cold calling, we primarily were soliciting donations for agencies that had contacted us to do the work, so felt less scuzzy. Think police departments, fire departments, etc. We kept a portion of donations for operating expenses. Everything over a certain threshold went directly to the receiving party. Everybody wins. I enjoyed the job as the scripts were simple. I was allowed to read a book and such between calls, and a number of my friends were also employed there so we could hang out during lunch breaks. The pay was a decent chunk, above minimum wage at that time, so it was a good gig. I also had a knack for it, and at one point was fifth in sales across all their sites they had in operation, second in our building. One summer, while driving to work, my car promptly dies with no warning and I'm left stranded on the road. As you do in this situation, back before cell phones for poor college students were a thing, I walk to the nearest house and ask to use the phone. I call my dad, who starts driving to get me, and call my work to let them know I'll be late. My boss says fine and that he'll chat with me when I get in. Father shows up with my mother in 2 cars. I take the extra, and he begins the arduous process of towing my car back to the house. This involved tying a rope to the front of the car and to the back of his vehicle and crawling back home so he could fix it himself. I've been in that back car and did not envy my father being in the back car with only 10 feet of space between him and the car my mother was driving, but I'm off to work. I arrive to work, clock in almost an hour after the start of my shift, and I'm promptly told by the front receptionist that my boss would like to see me in his office. So I head on back. Beginning details completed. Cue to the start of the MC story. My boss and I have always had a good rapport. I'm a good worker, get good reviews, and he and I have some similar interests outside of work we can chat about occasionally. When I arrive in his office, he's shuffling some papers around and has laid out a few documents facing me. As close as I can recall, this is the conversation that followed. Boss, hope everything worked out with the car. Glad to have you here. Couple things I need to discuss with you. First of all, as I'm sure you're aware, being more than 30 minutes late to work is considered a Class C violation. 3 classes, from C to A, C being the least egregious, if insufficient time is given prior to the occurrence. This is your first violation, so I'd like to talk to you about what happens next. I'm sweating at this point. I've never even been talked to about being out of order on anything while working here, and getting my first violation scared the heck out of me. So I'm sitting there, white-faced, and he continues. Boss, no official write-up or anything occurs for a first violation, or even the first few Class C violations, but it's manager's discretion on the punishment depending on past behaviors. Now, you're a good employee, and I've put into corporate a few times to give you a raise, but because you only work during your school breaks, it's denied, as you aren't considered full-time. So the papers I have here are your termination papers and an offer letter I'd like to extend to you to hire you back on again. So in short, before I file these, I'd like to ask, is it okay if I fire you? So we go through the process of him firing me, which then allowed me to extend an offer to me to rehire me at roughly a 25% increase in pay, since he could justify to corporate the bump as he was hiring someone with experience. In talking with him, he let me know it was something he occasionally did to the high school and college workers to get around the corporate's policy of not allowing raises to people that didn't work 1,000 plus hours in a year. It was his own way of being maliciously compliant with a policy that didn't allow him to reward some people that he thought deserved it. He had been apparently waiting for me to do something that he could technically fire me for. The way their back-end systems worked, it wouldn't even show up as a break in service, since the firing and hiring happened on the same day. And since I never worked more than the minimum 1,000 hours each year, I didn't have any tenor or anything to be worried about losing. The laugh he and the receptionist had when he walked me back to the front to introduce her to the new employee was enjoyable, and I've had a fun story to tell ever since. Entitled mom won't watch her kids. They climb into the pasture with my horses. I live in a rural neighborhood. Everyone's got 3 to 8 acres, so we're all pretty spaced out. I live on my 5 acres, and my nearest neighbors are a sweet elderly couple about 1 acre from me. They're perfect. The husband does yard work as a hobby and his wife bakes. We have a nice agreement where if I need something big chainsawed, he takes the wood down and uses it for the fireplace, and in exchange, I trade recipes and bake with his wife. Honestly, they just like the company. I own my own home, have 2 horses, a cat, and recently my mom has also moved in because she was in financial trouble. I'm happy to help as she's good company and I'd do anything for her. And then everything changed when COVID attacked. So here's where things go south. My neighbor's son and his family, wife and 2 girls, 4 and 7, live in the nearest city and didn't feel safe. I don't blame them, and because my neighbors are saints, they opened their home and the brood moved right in. Up until this point, I was the youngest person in the neighborhood at 29, so having kids wander around is new for everyone. At first, it was no big issue. They stayed inside, got settled, maybe they were good kids. Total long shot, I know, but a girl can hope. So one morning, I'm letting my horses out into the front pasture, a Clydesdale and a Welsh pony, and I hear the most high-pitched squealing from next door. It was so shrill, my Clydesdale second-guessed going outside, but cautiously proceeded, only to be met with more squeals. I pop my head out and the 2 girls are literally losing their minds. And I get it. Little White Pony and the horse from Brave, but still, they're large animals they don't know, so they should have the sense to not approach, right? Pfft. Not a snowball's chance in hell. These kids sprint to the fence shrieking. The pony runs around in panic, and the Clydesdale stands there with the same what the F look I've got on my face. Then the 4-year-old starts to go under the fence. Hell no. Don't you dare climb under that fence. Said firmly, and admittedly kinda harsh, but I'll be damned if I have my horses mow over a kid. I walked over to them and they look like they're about to cry, but I explained firmly that they are big animals and could hurt them easily and to never go over or under the fence. They go home. I clean stalls. An hour in, I hear someone banging on my home's door, and I can see through my barn's hatch door my mom and the kid's mom are having a conversation. The kid's mom then storms down to the barn. I've never met this lady, but I know an entitled parent when I see one. Joy of joys. She starts going off on me. How dare you make my kids cry? They just wanted to see the ponies. Blah, blah, blah. But when she takes a breath, I get my point across. Ma'am, your youngest was crawling under the fence towards 2 large animals. None of you know. That Clydesdale is a 2,000-pound draft horse. He can literally crush you, not feel it, and do permanent damage. The pony looks cute but needs an experienced hand as he's very untrustworthy, flighty, and has a tendency to bite. Your children are not allowed near them without my consent and heavy supervision, and never allowed in the pasture with them. Do you understand? She then starts ranting about, well, if they're so dangerous, why do you have them? Are you even allowed to have them? I should call animal control. That crap. 1, they're my personal horses. Yes, I'm allowed to have them. 2, your kids trespassed onto my property. I'm trying to keep them safe. 3, this is not a petting zoo. She huffs off. I continue work. Later that evening, when the husband gets home, I explain what happened. He's understandably alarmed, and I explain how dangerous that situation is. He agrees. Not that my horses are aggressive, mind you, but it's inherently dangerous in general. You've got a 50 to 200-pound human versus an 800 to 2,000-pound horse. If you don't know what you're doing, you can be seriously injured. Pure physics. So I'm optimistic with this reaction, but no, he's not often home, so I stay cautious. Later in the next week, I'm working from home and I suddenly hear screaming. Not excited screaming, scared little kid screaming. I rush outside and the 4-year-old is bawling in the middle of the pasture with the pony doing laps around the perimeter of the fence as my Clydesdale slowly approaches the little girl. The 7-year-old is crying outside the fence and calling for her mom, but clearly their mom is not watching them. My initial terror recedes a bit because my Clydesdale is essentially a golden retriever in a horse's body. Sweetest pushover in the world. He's gingerly approaching her in a slow, friendly way and being as non-threatening as he can be. And with him so close, the pony won't rush them. He's probably about 3 steps from her, but I yell for him to halt, and like a good boy, he does. I make my way in with them and start asking the girl questions. Are you hurt? Being paranoid, she's not, but she's clearly scared, so I pick her up and walk her out, making my Clydesdale heel to me just in case the pony gets a dumb idea. The mom is still nowhere in sight, so I take them to my neighbors. What proceeds is about 30 minutes of screaming and crying. The girl's mother was the one to open the door. She starts screaming at me and firing off questions before my neighbors intervene. I tell everyone exactly what happened, and my elderly neighbors blew up at her, not me. They screamed at her for being so irresponsible and negligent. How they could have been hurt. The mom tried throwing blame on me, but they weren't having it. My neighbors apologized profusely, and I go about my day until the husband gets home. He came by and apologized too for his family's behavior, and especially the behavior of his wife. I accepted it and said I understood. They're little girls. I too know the allure of magnificent fluffy horses. The mom was at fault for not watching the kids. I'm just glad everyone was okay. The girls were still really shook up, so I extended an olive branch because, well, I was an overexcited kid who liked horses once too, just with a horse mom who knew what she was doing, and I didn't want this to completely traumatize them from being around horses. So the next day, I properly introduced them to my Clydesdale, with him in his stall, with the inside hatch open and the girls being supervised by their father and me, safe in the barn. They loved it. Clydesdale loved the attention. Everyone's happy, right? Well, except the mom, who took my olive branch as an offer to teach them horseback riding, give free lessons, and other crap. But her husband shot it down hard, and presumably so did my neighbors. Since then, it's been quiet. I did, however, install a second electrical wire on the bottom, not just on the top, just in case, and yes, they did test it. 7-year-old got zapped pretty good and got in trouble with her dad. Aside from that, there have been no incidents other than them wanting to pet them when I drop evening feed once in a while. Here's hoping it stays peaceful. But seriously, don't go up to animals you don't know.